Hello, welcome to the Mann and Perrin Families of Western Iowa YouTube channel. My name is Brian Mann, writer, director, and producer of an 11-part video series about the Mann and Perrin families who settled in the Less Hills of Western Iowa. In this episode, we will kick off the video series by taking a look back at the 17th and 18th centuries, from 16 to 1800, and covering what we have learned so far about the arrival of our ancestors in this country. As you can imagine, the further back in time you go, the harder it is to uncover evidence of your family connections. With the creation of the internet, it seems there is an endless amount of information at our fingertips. It can be difficult, challenging, and overwhelming to sift through everything you come across in order to find that one nugget of information that extends the understanding of your family connections further into the past. I'm still searching and will continue to search, but as stated in the introduction episode, it's high time to share what I've learned about my family to date with my family. There's something I've learned along the way. Throughout all my research, becoming a student of my family history has also meant becoming a student of history in general. Before we dive into the details about our family history in each episode of the Ancestry video series, we will first establish some historical context to better help you understand what was going on in our country during the specific time frames we will be sharing family events and stories. If you too have become a student of your family history, one of the questions you are sure to ask yourself is, why did they do that? Not that we will ever really know the answers to those questions, but having a good understanding of the events going on in our country at those times may help you better understand. So, what were some of the important historical events that occurred between 16 and 1800 that may have influenced the aspirations and decisions of our ancestors? For my relatives and family members watching, I promise we'll be getting to the good stuff soon. But since we will be spanning 200 years in this episode, we have more historical events to cover than we will once we get into the decade-by-decade episodes. I think the first major thing to consider, and perhaps better understand, is during the early 1600s, people were leaving England and Europe for the New World, America, to escape the jurisdiction of the Church of England, which they found corrupt. English persecution had led a group of separatists to flee across the English Channel to Holland, and then across the Atlantic to the New World in search of religious freedom. The earliest settlement in America dates back to 1607 in southeast Virginia at an English settlement known as Jamestown, which was established by the London Company. As early as 1619, the first signs of an independent representative assembly was formed in Virginia called the House of Burgesses. And one of the darkest chapters in our nation's history began when the first African slaves were brought to Jamestown. In 1620, the Plymouth colony in Massachusetts was established by pilgrims from England. Before embarking from their ship, the Mayflower, 41 male passengers signed the Mayflower Compact, an agreement that formed the basis of the colony's government. By 1650, colonial population was estimated at over 50,000 people. In 1664, the English seized the city and colony of New Amsterdam from the Dutch and renamed it New York. Nearly 100 years later, in 1763, the final conflict in an ongoing struggle between the British and French for control of eastern North America concluded with the British winning a decisive victory over the French on the Plains of Abraham outside Quebec in what is known as the French and Indian War. With the Treaty of Paris, the British formally gained control of Canada and all French possessions east of the Mississippi. In 1770, British troops fired into a mob, killing 5 men and leading to intense public protests in what is known as the Boston Massacre. 3 years later, in 1773, a group of colonial patriots disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded 3 ships in the Boston harbor and dumped more than 300 crates of tea overboard as a protest against the British tea tax, the Boston Tea Party. In 1774, the First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia with 56 delegates representing every colony except Georgia. Notable delegates included Patrick Henry, George Washington, and Samuel Adams. In April 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, between the British Army and colonial Minutemen marked the beginning of the American Revolution, the War of Independence fought between Great Britain and the 13 British colonies on the eastern seaboard of North America. On July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. In June 1777, the Continental Congress approved the first official flag of the United States. And on November 15th, 1777, the Continental Congress adopted the Articles of Confederation, the first U.S. Constitution. In December 1777, the battle-weary and destitute Continental Army spent the brutally cold winter at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania through June of 1778. On October 19th, 1781, British General Charles Cornwallis surrendered to George Washington at Yorktown, Virginia. Great Britain formally acknowledged American independence in the Treaty of Paris, which officially brought the war to a close on September 3, 1783. During the spring and summer of 1787, the Constitutional Convention was held in Philadelphia, made up of delegates from 12 of the original 13 colonies, and drafted the U.S. Constitution. On February 4, 1789, George Washington was unanimously elected President of the United States in a vote by state electors. On March 4th of that year, the U.S. Constitution went into effect, having been ratified by 9 states, and the U.S. Congress met for the first time at Federal Hall in New York City. On April 30th, 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as the first president. In 1790, the U.S. Supreme Court met for the first time at the Merchants Exchange Building in New York City. By this time, the nation's census showed that the population had climbed to nearly 4 million people. On December 15, 1791, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights, were ratified. On March 4, 1793, George Washington's second inauguration was held in Philadelphia, and Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, which greatly increased the demand for slave labor. 4 years later, on March 4, 1797, John Adams was inaugurated as the second president in Philadelphia. So, with that fairly brief historical recap of the inception and birth of our country, when and where did the Manns and Perrins first become part of that story? Throughout the Ancestry episodes, Elena and I will be sharing information with you and leading you on this journey as we piece together the preceding paths of our ancestors. I will be taking you through the events and history of the Mann family, and Elena will be doing the same for the Perrin family. So let's get started. The Manns first arrived in this country around the year 1636 and settled near the present-day town of Scituate, Massachusetts. I believe my 7th great-grandfather, William Mann, and his older brother Richard migrated to New England during the Puritan Great Migration between 1621 and 1640. Richard and William were born around the years 1605 and 1607, respectively, in Cornwall, England. The original homestead is located in Scituate, Massachusetts, near the intersection of Stockbridge Road and Woodbine Way. On this property stands a house called the Mann House, which was built in 1825 by Richard Mann's great-great-great-grandson, Thomas Mann, who was born in 1795 and died in 1882. The house was last lived in by Percy Mann, who died in 1968 at the age of 93. Today, the house is now a museum filled with artifacts dating back to the 17th century. On February 16, 1655, Richard fell through the ice on a partially frozen pond between his house and farm fields and died of exposure. His brother William, my seventh great-grandfather, died on March 7, 1662, near Cambridge, Massachusetts. William was married to Mary Jared on May 19, 1643, and they only had one child, named Samuel. Samuel was born on July 6, 1647, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. His mother died just before his 10th birthday on June 11, 1657. Samuel, my sixth great-grandfather, married Esther Ware on May 19, 1673. Samuel passed away on May 22, 1719, and Esther died on September 3, 1734. They had at least 11 children, their third oldest child being my fifth great-grandfather, Nathaniel, who was born on February 9, 1677. Nathaniel married Elizabeth George on December 19, 1704. They had 10 children. The second youngest was my fourth great-grandfather, Timothy, who was born on May 3, 1722. Nathaniel died on May 11, 1756, and Timothy's mother Elizabeth passed away on March 28, 1770. Before his death, Nathaniel made out a will on October 19, 1754, calling himself of Rentham, Massachusetts, and mentioned his wife and all their children except for Timothy. I have yet to discover the mystery behind why Timothy was not named in his father's last will and testament. I suspect that it is somehow connected to the difficulties I have experienced trying to determine the identity of Timothy's wife. Whoever she may be, they brought a son into the world around the year 1760 and named him Nathaniel, after Timothy's father, which I find curiously interesting considering that Timothy was not mentioned in his father's will. Timothy died around the year 1805 in Dummerston, Vermont. Nathaniel, my third great-grandfather, married Mary Eunice Bennett around the year 1790. They had at least 6 children, the fourth oldest being my great-great-grandfather, Richard Montgomery Mann. Richard was born on April 4, 1803, in Dummerston, Vermont. In Episode 2, 1800 to 1810, we will pick up here and continue looking into the lives of Nathaniel, Mary Eunice, my second great-grandfather Richard, his siblings, and their movements across the country. And now, I will hand the camera and mic over to Elena to share with you what we know about the Perrin family.
Hello again, I'm Elena Mann. I'll be taking you through the events and history of the Perrin family throughout this episode and all the remaining ancestry episodes. The Perrins first arrived in this country around the year 1719 and settled near the present-day towns of Hebron and Gilead, Connecticut. Thomas Perrin V, my seventh great-grandfather, was born in England. His birth date is unknown. We know that he married Sarah Phelps around the year 1712 in England. The first records of Thomas V in New England was in the year 1719. On August 24, 1719, Thomas purchased land from Joseph Phelps of Hartford in Hebron, Connecticut, near the Black Ledge River. Before arriving in the new country and soon after Thomas V and Sarah were married in England, they had a son, who they named Thomas Perrin VI in the year 1712. My sixth great-grandfather, Thomas VI, would have been a young boy of 6 to 7 years old when he and his family first arrived in New England. Thomas Perrin V died on September 17, 1753, and his wife Sarah passed away July 11, 1742. On February 14, 1738, Thomas Perrin VI married Jerusha Porter. On January 1st, 1739, they had a son, who they also named Thomas Perrin VII, my fifth great-grandfather. His father, Thomas VI, passed away on June 27, 1789, and his mother, Jerusha Porter, died on May 23, 1754. My fifth great-grandfather, Thomas VII, married Martha Savory on September 30th, 1762, in Hebron, Connecticut. On December 20th, 1782, Thomas VII and Martha had a son named Ephraim Perrin, my fourth great-grandfather. Our research indicates that both Thomas VII and Martha Savory both died in the year 1822. On November 24th, 1805, Ephraim Perrin married Hannah Laura Draper near Granville, New York. About 6.5 years later, Ephraim and Hannah had a son, who they named Charles Chauncey Perrin, on April 12, 1812. Charles Chauncey is my third great-grandfather.
Over 80 years passed between the time the Manns first set foot on this continent in 1636 to when the Perrins first arrived in 1719. By the turn of the 19th century, my ancestral branch of the Manns, through 6 generations, migrated approximately 725 miles west from Scituate, Massachusetts to Sandusky, Ohio. My ancestral branch of the Perrins, through 5 generations, migrated about 200 miles north from Hebron, Connecticut to Granville, New York. Over their respective 165 and 80-year time frames, our families witnessed many of the formative events that spawned our nation. They poured a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into the homes they built, into the fields they farmed, and into the families they raised. Because of their many sacrifices and successes, I was given a chance at life. I am grateful to them all and hope that the testament of my life finds favor in their eyes. Who knows, maybe one day I'll have the opportunity to ask them firsthand. This concludes Episode 1, 1600 to 1800 of the Mann and Perrin Families of Western Iowa Ancestry video series. I know we crammed a lot of information into this episode and went through it all at a fairly quick pace. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or bits and pieces of information you may have to fill in some of the gaps. We included our email address in the description below. In the remaining Ancestry video series, our episodes will cover just a single decade at a time, taking us from 1800 to the turn of the 20th century. So, we will be slowing things down quite a bit, and the length of the remaining episodes will vary, depending upon how much information we have to share with you. I can assure you, some of the upcoming stories are quite interesting. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on that notifications button to be notified when new episodes are published. Our goal is to publish episodes every 2 weeks, so keep an eye out for Episode 2, 1800 to 1810. With that, kind regards and thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.